Hello everyone and welcome to the final installment of the Serendipity Knit Along. And this is a session that's going to get you through the rest of your garment. And this is also the video where the two garments really diverge from each other. So throughout the video I'm going to have screens that will say pullover or cardigan or both garments. And so you can use the scroll along the bottom of your screen to just get to what you need. Well, there's a lot to do no matter what garment you're making, so let's get started. Now it's time to work the short row sides. You begin by putting all of the lower edge stitches and the markers that you put onto the lifelines with the lower edge stitches onto one long needle. And the markers are the left lower front edge, the left lower back edge, the right lower back edge, and the right lower front edge. Okay? And you're going to be picking up the same number of stitches that you did on the upper side of the assembled side tabs, on the underside of the assembled side tabs. And you're going to be working in short rows between the two lower edge markers. So when you did the sleeves, you did short rows that went like this, filling in until you got to the lower edge, to the markers underneath the arms. Here what you're going to do is long rows that fill in like this, back and forth to the lower edge markers. The short row sides for the pullover are worked exactly the same way as for the cardigan, except that instead of having one long row along the lower edge, which is what you have for the cardigan, you have a round along the lower edge, and the beginning of the round is in the center of the front. Here is a completed short row side on the cardigan, and this area here is quite like what you did with the sleeve when you work down the shoulder. You work decreases each right side row until the two decreases are adjacent to each other. And in this case, though, you're going to keep your markers in place because you'll need them for when you're working the edge. I've completed the short row sides on my pullover, and that's what they look like. I love how the line continues from the octagons all the way down to the lower edge. And what I wanted to show you is that the marker positions that you use for making your short row sides are going to be, you're going to continue to use them as you work the lower edge. And they're going to mark where you're going to work your increasing stitch pattern. And you want to take all 6 of these positions and set them up so you have markers straddling the 2 knit 2. So it's a purl 2, marker, knit 2, marker, purl 2. And the 6 positions that you're going to have markers at are the 2 lower edges in the front, the 2 lower edges in the back, left over from the short rows, and then the 2 side positions. One final thing, you're going to need to move your stitch marker 1 stitch in the front at the beginning of the round so that you can work your twisted stitches without the marker getting in the way. The neck is worked in garter stitch, and there are decreases in 5 locations. You have a double decrease in the front center, and then on the front and back of each shoulder. And the reason you're working these decreases is so that the neckline will conform to your body and it won't gap. So on this pullover I've left a fairly deep V, and I've got a narrow edge. There's only about 4 garter ridges on this edge. If you know that you're going to want to have much more coverage and a more shallow V, plan to work a wider garter stitch edge. And when you do this, work your decrease rounds every 4th round instead of every 2nd round. That way you won't run out of stitches. The cardigan is ready for its lower edge, and you can easily see where the 6 increase positions are located. They're marked with these double markers. And they're the same as what you saw on the pullover. It's just easier to see with the cardigan laid out. There are 2 additional markers that you have on the cardigan, and those are located 2 stitches from the end on each side. And what you're going to do here is maintain the stitch pattern from the front. What else do I need to tell you? The lower edge is worked in rows, so you need to follow the correct directions in your pattern. Make sure you are working the stitch pattern that's written in rows. One final thing, if you're working an odd number of bands, you're going to end up your final row with the wrong side facing, and you don't want that. So work one more row even, and then turn and bind everything off with the right side facing using Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off. I finished my lower edge. I had 6 bands, and I've bound the lower edge off with Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off, and I have 1 stitch remaining. So let me show you how you're going to pick up stitches along the front edge. When you were working in rows, you knit the first stitch of every row. And so what you have along this front edge is a purl bump for every second row. And to establish the front edge stitches, what you're going to do is pick up and knit a stitch in each purl bump, just like this. So it is 1 stitch picked up for every 2 rows worked. And you're going to pick up in this way along the front edge until you get to the top of the point where you transition from the octagon to the lower edge stitches, and you're going to place your first marker here, and then you're going to continue picking up in this way until you get to this cast-on ring here, and you will place your second marker there, and you will be working your buttonholes between those 2 marker positions, and I'll show you that in a moment. So I've established all my front edge stitches, and I've worked the first wrong side row. And as I said previously, the first marker is going to be placed between the lower edge and the octagon. And then the second marker is going to be placed at the cast-on ring, and this is where you're going to be working your buttonholes on the right front edge. Now when you're working your right side rows, you're going to want to make this turn smoothly, and to do that you're going to work an increase on each side of the marker at the center point of the front edge. Alright, then you're going to continue up until you get to the shoulder. When you get to these markers, you're going to work a decrease on each side, and that's going to cause the shoulder to conform nicely to your shoulder and prevent gaps. So you're going to continue across working the neck edge stitches that are already established, and then it's just going to be the same process on the other side. You've got a marker on each side of the shoulder. You're going to work a decrease on each side, and then continuing around to the left center front, and again this is going to be an increase on each side of this marker, and continue down the front. You're going to have a marker at the lower edge, and this is the left side is where you're going to be sewing your buttons. And so I am going to work a couple more rows and come back and show you how to place the buttonholes. It's time to work the buttonholes along the left front edge. And before working the buttonholes, I find it really helpful to use safety pins to sequester off the stitches that are going to actually be parts of buttonholes. So I'll be using 3 stitches for each buttonhole, and I have 5 buttonholes planned along this edge. You need to know that you have to have at least 2 stitches between the final buttonhole and the center front marker, and at least 1 stitch between the lowest buttonhole and the lower edge marker. To work a tight 1-row buttonhole, you're going to begin with the yarn in the front of the work, and you slip 1 purlwise, take the yarn back, slip a 2nd stitch purlwise, and bind off 1. Yarn forward, slip 1, bind it off, yarn back, slip 1, and bind it off. Alright, so now you've bound off 3 stitches. If you're working a 5-stitch buttonhole, you would go forward and back 1 more time and bind off 2 more stitches. Alright, but I need a 3-stitch opening. At this point you return the final stitch on the right needle to the left needle and work a cable cast on. Okay, so I have 3 stitches that in my opening, so I need to cast on 4 stitches with the cable cast on. Now if you had a 5-stitch opening, you would cast on 6 stitches with your cable cast on. So, alright, so there's 4 stitches cast on with the cable cast on. Then you return the final stitch cast on to the right needle and you bind it off. Okay, things are a little tight at this point, so you need to be careful to only slip 1 stitch off at the end. Alright, now yarn forward and slip 1, yarn back, slip 1, yarn forward, slip 1. So you've slipped 3 stitches. That completes the buttonhole opening. And then you continue across the row in established pattern. Now, while the buttonhole opening has 3 stitches, it actually involves 5 stitches to make it. This is why you need to have the spaces at the beginning and the end of the front between the markers and the increase on the top to allow for that extra stitch. And the last thing you need to do before continuing, take your button and make sure it actually will go through your buttonhole. Alright, and it does. Alright, so I'll just continue across the front edge and continue to make my buttonholes. Well, that pretty much wraps things up. Thank you so much for participating in the knit along. I really enjoyed putting this together for you. And I wanted to let you know that if you finish your pullover or your cardigan within 3 weeks of the date that I post this video, I will enter you into a drawing and you very well may win a little prize from Queenie. So don't forget to get your picture posted in the Ravelry discussion forum for this knit along. And again, thank you so much for your purchase, for your participation. I've had so much fun. I hope you have too. Happy knitting!